Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of grooveu's The Woodshed. My name is Sarah Hudson and I am the Director of Development at grooveu and also a member of the all-girl band The Salty Caramels. This week, I want to cover with you how to make a living booking non-traditional gigs. And specifically, we're going to focus on corporate gigs today. When you think about a career as a musician, most people picture playing in bars, life on the road, maybe even living out of a van, and there's certainly that too, but oftentimes we overlook the corporate and events industry. Music plays a much larger role in corporate events than you think. It's definitely not for everyone, as there are certainly some creative limits in corporate gigs, and some musicians feel like playing covers at a corporate event is like selling your soul or being a trained monkey. It's also not the right fit for every band depending on your style. However, it is a reliable, sustainable source of income and offers some perks that life on the road does not. For me, playing at 1 p.m. is much preferable to playing at 1 a.m. And a guaranteed check from a corporate budget is often better than passing the hat at your friend's bar. Today, I've got 7 points that I will cover with you. Number 1, how do you get started? First, you need to identify your strengths and weaknesses to decide what kind of events you can even pitch your band or act to. Ask yourself key questions like, how long can you play for? Are you a good fit for background music? Can you perform in non-traditional spaces like outdoors or hotels or high-rises? Do you have the ability to provide your own sound? Do you have any obvious brand alignment? Once you have the answer to those questions, you can narrow your focus on the types of events you want to pitch. For example, my band, The Salty Caramels, has a food-related name. Therefore, we're a really good fit for Taste of the City events or food and drink themed festivals. The more flexible you can be, the more options you're going to have. Once you figure out your target market, you need to, number 2, identify the right point person. Typically, these corporate events are booked by one of 3 kinds of people. An internal employee, typically someone within the marketing department, a contracted event planner or a meeting planner. These people typically have a CMP title, or a talent booking agency. A good place to start is research the event or organization that you want to reach out to and find someone on their marketing team. You can also seek out booking agencies or event planners that specialize in corporate event planning. For cold calls or cold reach outs, make sure you have a good electronic press kit, EPK, to provide them with examples of upbeat music that appeals to your widest audience. For example, it's probably not a good idea to submit a ballad about your broken heart or a song with swear words to an agency looking to book a family-friendly party. Whether it's your first reach out or you've already booked the gig, it's important, number 3, to understand your client. In the case of a meeting planner or an organization's marketing person, there's a pretty good chance that they're not a musician. There's also a good chance that they've never worked with a band before or very few bands. So that means they don't typically speak our vocabulary, and sometimes they don't have realistic expectations for hiring a band. So it's important that you have a little extra patience and kindness towards these individuals. Don't get super offended if they offer you a much lower rate than what you typically bill, or if they think that it's totally okay for you to play for 5 hours straight. It's your job as the band or artist to educate them on your needs and develop a plan that works for both parties. One example is one time my band was hired to play a black tie fundraiser, and the event planner was very upset that our sound system had too many cables. He asked if we could look less cable-y because he didn't like how messy the setup looked. Instead of being divas about it, we just came to a compromise and figured out we could use an extra rug to cover some of the stage cables, and it wasn't a big deal. Which brings me to item number 4. Negotiate your contract. When you begin talking with the booking agent or planner, make sure right off the bat that you understand their budget. While I'd never encourage anyone to perform for exposure, it's also good to remember that corporate events and festivals specifically have other perks than just the cash aspect. If the organization can't afford your asking price, maybe consider what other benefits can it bring. Will your compensation include food and drinks? Specifically at corporate gigs, really fancy food and drinks. Can you bring a guest to the event? Will your guest get food and drinks? Will there be a chance to reach an audience at this event that you'd normally not be able to reach at your typical gigs? Typically, corporate gigs are a long open house style, and organizers really want music for the entire time. I can't emphasize this enough. Make sure that you negotiate breaks. It's not physically or mentally healthy to play for 4 hours straight without food or bathroom breaks. Another thing to consider is whether or not you'll be able to sell merch. Some formal events don't want the eyesore of having a merch table out or having lines or asking people to buy things other than the purpose of their event. So make sure you're being compensated enough to make up for the lack of physical merch sales that you might not get. All right, let's talk about number 5, the most important thing, understanding your venue. The venue is typically the trickiest thing about doing corporate and event gigs. First of all, rarely are you performing in a space that's designed for live music or has a built-in sound system. And oftentimes, even if there is a built-in sound system, it's likely that it's used for speaking and not musicians, and no one typically knows how to run it. If possible, I highly suggest that you ask to do a walkthrough of the venue in advance. And if you're using any venue gear, ask to speak directly with the AV person and get an inventory list. And bring extra gear just in case. I can't tell you how many times a venue said, "Oh yeah, we'll provide sound," only to find out that they think the definition of providing sound for a full band is having a karaoke machine and just one SM58. Here are some things to look for when you do your walkthrough or to make sure that you ask for in advance. How big is your performance space? Do you have a stage or risers? What are the acoustics of the room? Will we have a green room? Is there power supplied, and where are the nearest outlets located? Where should you load in? Can you leave your vehicle near the load-in doors, or do you have to move it to a designated parking space afterwards? Are you performing on the main floor, or will you need to bring gear up an elevator or, God forbid, stairs? It's a musician's nightmare. Will they provide a cart and people to assist with load-in? What is the parking situation, and do you need a permit or a pass? Do you have to be loaded out by a certain time? And story on that one later. If you're performing outdoors, there are some other things to consider, like, is the performance space covered? Does the event have a rain plan? How much amplification do you need? And is there proper power supplied? I've performed at a wide array of events and venues, and it's easy to forget how much the atmosphere of your performance space actually impacts your performance. For example, several times my band has performed at this beautiful conservatory, but they keep the temperature of it at 80 degrees with high humidity just to keep the plants happy. And playing for 3 hours in high humidity not only makes your instruments go constantly out of tune, but is also terribly uncomfortable. Which brings me to point number 6, gig etiquette. Make sure you understand what kind of gig you're performing at and what the dress code will be. There's nothing worse than showing up to a black tie event majorly underdressed and vice versa. And if you're not sure, it's perfectly okay to ask. Oftentimes, these events have an open bar, and as the entertainment, you're offered a tab. And it's totally okay to drink 1 or 2 drinks, but remember, you're working. Getting hammered on the job is just the quickest way to never get another gig again. Ask the event organizers in advance what the agenda for the evening is. Will there be announcements or programming during the show? Will they need to use your mic or the stage area to do those announcements? Will they expect you to make the announcements for them? Remember, this is not your show. This is the hardest part. People did not come to this event for the sole purpose of hearing you perform. You're a hired gun. This is so hard, I know, but it means that you should likely plan for primarily a beat set list and at least 50 to 75% covers. Trust me, as a songwriter and as a band that writes original music, I understand this is so hard. The thing I like to remember is not to take it personally. I like to find a balance. Everyone needs a creative outlet, so save your originals for your longtime fans at your next headlining show. And hey, maybe at your corporate gig, you've recruited some new fans to come hear your originals at your show. While there is certainly a time and place for talking in between songs, keep the transition chatter during a corporate gig to a minimum. Typically, event organizers want nonstop music with a few breaks in between. And when you put your set list together, try to develop instrumental transitions to link 2 to 3 songs together. And if you're struggling to fill time, maybe try doubling the length of the middle interlude, or doubling the bridge, or hey, give your bandmates a few extra solos. This can double as a way to disguise giving yourself a break and taking turns getting the spotlight mid-set. All right, I have to address this. Every gig has a creepy fan. And at this point, I just come to expect it. There's the person who's had too much to drink and wants to join you on stage. There's typically at least one person who will hit on you. There's a person who thinks that they're your new groupie and just wants to hang out and talk during your set. Or there's the person who constantly badgers you with requests. Do you know Freebird? I still don't have the perfect solution for how to deal with these people, but it's totally fine to kindly remind them that you're working and therefore you really can't hang out. If the issue persists and makes you feel uncomfortable, just notify the event organizer so they can interfere on your behalf. If the gig goes well, hopefully you've gained a few new fans who hopefully will ask you about buying merch. And while that's great, just remember it's important to remember the event's policy about selling merch in advance. You don't want to offend them and you don't want to step on anyone's toes. Many times, the caramels just have a few extra items handy on stage so that if someone inquires about purchasing music, we can do the exchange quickly without distracting from the event as a whole. As we discussed before, you will most likely both be hired by and performing for non-musicians. So they're gonna have a few unrealistic expectations and say things that are just, well, dumb. One time my band performed at a very fancy black tie event and it was on the 7th floor of a building downtown. We brought all our own sound and had to load it in a pretty far distance. After the event, we changed out of our fancy clothing into comfortable loadout clothes and began loading out our gear. The organizers failed to mention that we had to be out of the venue by a certain time and just didn't have realistic expectations about how long it takes to break down your sound system. They just thought it magically appeared and disappeared. They initially were upset both by the fact that we had changed into regular clothes and that tearing down was taking so long. This is just another example of why it's so important to understand expectations up front and to educate the people that are booking the gig so you're both on the same page. I'm sorry, but I'm just not going to load out speakers and high heels and a ball gown. Which brings me to my last and final point, number 7, how to turn one gig into 10. The thing about corporate gigs is if you do them properly, you'll rarely have to work to book another corporate gig again. This industry is all about relationships. So make sure you maximize every opportunity at your gig to ensure to leave you with 2 or 3 more right in the calendar when you leave. You can do this a few ways. Number 1, capture content. Even if all you have is your phone, make sure to take photos, video, and capture audio from your performance to use as samples in your corporate gig EPK. Post on social so your audience knows that you play corporate gigs. Second, work the room on your breaks. Mingle with the guests. It's relatively easy to introduce yourself when you're the entertainment because, well, you already have a talking point, and people are generally eager to talk with you anyway, because you're the entertainment. Because of the nature of these events, it's pretty common that you'll run into someone who's planning their own event and then wants to talk with you about performing at that gig, which is great, but it's not enough just to talk about it. Make sure you exchange that business card and do the follow-up after the gig. Thirdly, maintain a good relationship with the event organizers. Ask if they have a date for next year's event and express interest in returning. This benefits both parties because the event organizer will get to cross something off their list for planning a whole year in advance. If you're working for a booking agency, ask if they have other clients that you'd be a good fit for. And send them a thank you note after the gig and ask if they'd be willing to serve as a reference for future gigs. Remember, this is a relationship-driven industry. So in the same way that you can make gigs work for you, you can also have them work against you. Never, ever, ever show up for a gig unprepared and never burn a bridge. And that's truly the secret. Just be nice and be good at your craft. I hope you enjoyed this episode of The Woodshed. Again, my name is Sarah Hudson, and be sure to check out grooveu's other Woodshed content at grooveu.edu/woodshed.